Hi, I'm Mark, producer of Roundtable, the TV series born here in New York City at the legendary Manhattan Neighborhood Network Studios. The exchange of ideas is important, and that is why we bring to you the following presentation. Please watch.
Good evening and welcome to Single Shot Show at Manhattan Neighborhood Network's Roundtable. Virtually in every program we discuss difference between original pure film photography and modern digital techniques, talking about which one provides us more interesting results and more flexibility, but never in the studio we had an artist who create something with such a pure and original process, which virtually allows you to see exactly what the camera saw, and at the same time creating surrealistic images of extreme aesthetic value and simply beautiful. I'm introducing to you Michael Colavito. Hello, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. And as we was discussing before the program, your works are amazing, and if somebody would just show them to me and tell me that they was achieved without any digital manipulation or even Lightroom manipulation, I would probably have serious doubts if it's even possible, but yet they exist and you're the creator of them. So can you tell us a little bit about the process, how they created?
Sure, and thank you for having me on the show. What I've done since the beginning of me, delving into fine art, was the first concern for me was to not repeat what other artists do. I mean, to see the same work becomes boring and mundane, and I wanted to do something that would really inspire my viewers in a way that was immediate for them. So, I mean, it's taken many, many years, 3 decades, for me to develop a process, and it's called 21 Fundamental Principles of Pure Photography. And what it's really about is a continuation and, if you will, a reinvention of what the original masters of photography put forth. And when I say the original masters, I'm going all the way back, speaking about like Ombre, Cartier-Bresson, and Paul Strand, Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Steichen, Man Ray. The real masters that made fine art photography the art form it is, so that when you go to a museum and you view work, you see that photography is every bit as essential to the world of fine art as all of the sculpting and painting that people were previously familiar with. So my 21 fundamental principles, and I want to make it clear that in no way do I feel I'm a better artist than any of these masters. That would be ridiculous. And also the process itself in no way qualifies the end result. My compositions and the masters I speak of and all artists are very individual, and in no way do I believe that art should actually be competitive in that sense, although maybe it is, but it really shouldn't be. And the work needs to stand on its own, have its own inspiration. Many people don't really care how the work is produced. I personally feel that it's absolutely crucial and critical to understand what goes in. My 21 fundamental principles, when I say are a continuation and extension, I mean it in this regard. I shoot on 8x10 large format chrome film with an 8x10 view camera. Many of these masters use view cameras as well. The major difference is that all of these guys, most of these guys, did black and white photography, and they went into the darkroom. And in the darkroom, they did all kinds of trickery and made changes and manipulated the image in various ways. I shoot chrome film, so there's no after image capture manipulation. Every last thing I do has to be on that original film, and if I make one little mistake, the shot is no good. What happened for me recently is, I mean, an artist has to expose his work and has to speak a lot, and which is why I'm thankful to be on your show today.
Our pleasure.
And I wrote to all of the museums, all the biggest in the world, and I actually wrote to Thomas P. Campbell of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Many of my, associates and peers told me, don't do this, it may sound a little arrogant, but I think it's really important and imperative for me to kind of explain further, although many of these museums have been tracking me for quite some time, to get very specific about my process. And what I wrote was, although the masters, again, all were very, very, profound in what they did, these guys started what was called straight photography. And what I'm speaking about is a continuation and an extension of that very term, straight photography. My photography is pure photography, and I actually wrote my letter to Mr. Campbell after seeing the book by Mia Feynman where he wrote the foreword. And the book was called Photography Manipulation or Faking It, and it was really produced or put out there by Adobe Photoshop and the Met in combination. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to show that the masters, although they used these techniques before Adobe Photoshop and digital, which is good because the show is trying to show a differentiation between the two, they were saying that many of these processes were quite similar. Because, those guys, and again, it goes to the essence and heart of what separates my work. Again, let me just be clear. I don't feel I'm a better artist than these guys. In no way am I saying that. In no way am I trying to qualify my work through my process. But the process is a continuation because there's absolutely no darkroom manipulation. There's no optical assemblage. I don't use color filters. I don't paint on the film. I don't paint on bodies. I have 21 very concrete, established ways of, doing art, or of avoiding, I should say, these ways that people would manipulate images, where again, you can go into the darkroom and you can take 2 or 3 negatives and you can print from those 2 or 3 negatives and do different things. So the process of purity, for me, really, really is significant. And for many years, I've even believed, and I think it may happen ultimately, that in the commercial world of advertisement, like some big company will get behind this and realize, well, this is important. One of my shots, I think that I may have shown you,
Yes.
to break one down, was of butterflies against the blue sky.
Yes.
When I did
Beautiful
this shot, you remember the image?
Absolutely, yes. It's a beautiful work.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
In that image, I took a glass butterfly. I went into the studio, I backlit it. On one piece of 8x10 sheet film, I exposed it 55 individual times to put it in 55 unique places. I then went back to each position and panned the camera so I would create movement next to each butterfly as though it was like fluttering around and it was, actually happening. After which, I needed the blue sky. I don't use color filters, I don't use color backdrops. Every single thing I do is a tribute to the organic process of picture taking through film and light. So what I did for that was I panned a blue wand, literally panned it during an exposure in the dark so that the 8x10 view camera and the film saw nothing but that blue. Upon completion of this image, it was 111 individual pictures or exposures on one piece of film. And it's difficult because when you shoot chrome film, there's really no latitude. If you're shooting negatives, whether it's color or black and white, you have 5-6 stops of range where if you over or underexpose it, you can actually correct that. When you shoot on chrome film, again, what you do and what you see later is what you get. I process the film once the image is completed and exposed, and there it is. If I made a mistake, the 10 hours of work that went in is thrown out the window. And again, none of this really matters and qualifies what you see. You're inspired by what you see, but the process is definitely about pure photography, and again, continuing kind of where they left off. You know, for me, my real concern as an artist is to inspire people. You know, and I want to really move people in such a great way that they say, oh, my goodness, my entire interpretation of art has changed. Or even if they just say, you've added to what I've already perceived art to be, as you know, I did with you a little bit when you were on the phone and telling me that you felt I was very unique, and it feels great because that's why I do what I do.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I totally agree with you that comparative approach in photography and in any form of visual art is completely useless. We really have to at least attempt to look at the piece of art on its own, not trying to connect it, even though at this point probably it's almost impossible. When we look at the art piece, there is always something we would be trying to remember, some name that would be popping up no matter what kind of visual art we're looking at. But indeed, the process itself is not justifying anything, and your fascinating results are not in any way related to the process itself, but they are final product. But I would actually like to ask you a little bit about the reasons why you have chosen that particular process after the break.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great.
Hello, this is Alex AG from Single Shot with another single trick. Tonight I want to tell you a little bit about post-production. There is one feature in Photoshop and many other photo editing programs that being used scarcely. That's channels. And there is only one reason why it is so. Nobody understands what it is for. Well, not nobody, but a lot of people don't. So when you see an image just like this, you are getting in channel that, and that's very counterintuitive because you actually supposed to be seeing this, 3 separate sets of color, not of grayscale. So if you would think of each channel as specific color, for example, of red being red instead of grays, blue being blue instead of grays, and green likewise, you'll find channels very useful for editing. So what I wanted to ask you, you was describing your process and pretty much in detail when you was talking about this image with butterfly, and indeed it's a very complicated, very laborious process that takes a lot of skill and a lot of patience. So as a person who is working more with digital photography and for a lot of things have very easy and very modern ways of achieving my results, and also looking in direction of surrealistic imagery, the question that was staying with me and I would like to ask you is, what is the reason for choosing that particular process that involves so much labor and requires you to work so much on something that in many ways can be achieved by easier means? I'm not talking about quality of the final product, you already established that's great.
Sure.
But it is indeed very laborious, so you gotta have reasons for choosing that particular process, that particular laborious way of creating those images.
Okay, first off, in answering this part one, I am in no way afraid of complexity or how hard something may be. That's the least of my concerns.
I totally see that.
So while, you know, people can take, you know, Adobe Photoshop or digital programs and put many things together and try to simulate, in fact, some of the stuff I do.
In a way, yes.
When you do it on film, 8x10 film particularly, it's like a color slide for 35 millimeter, everybody understands. You put it on a light box, you look through with a loop, you see a positive image. The 8x10 transparency has a wealth of detail that no digital format can match even right now in this modern day.
Absolutely, yes.
Many people over the years would run up to me in the street and they'd look at the big 810 view camera and they'd be perplexed. They'd say, well, this is like an old style camera, but it looks super modern. And when I work, I don't like to engage too much in the conversation of antiquation versus what's modern. But the bottom line is that the 8x10 piece of film has more resolution than anything that digital can do. So there's one reason that I will only prefer, film over digital.
I totally buy this reason. So
secondly, the contrast in film is superior to digital. The color saturation and the integrity of color is truer and purer. When people expose film traditionally, masters of photography, when color film came out, there are many, many different ISO and ASA, exposure numbers on the film, and many different boxes and film manufacturers that do, that make different products. Each of those products react to a certain light a different way. So if it's a, say, foggy, cloudy, gray day, you may choose a particular film emulsion, understanding what you were going to get later. And every condition or every lighting temperature would do the same for film. When today, typically, even with my 8x10 film, when you go to printing, it's still going back into the digital domain. So what happens today is I'll do a high resolution scan on my 8x10 original Chrome to bring it into the digital domain of printing. Fortunately, digital printing is high quality and they can get the colors pretty accurate, but ultimately there is no way that the original richness of color and trueness of color on the 8x10 film Chrome will ever be reproduced on a print. It's just not possible. And it's also interesting because, at auction recently I had success and sold an original Chrome for a good bit of money. And I was honored because it was cataloged next to Picasso and Warhol, and I was like, wow, I'm in this company. And then the film piece sold, but it was the original Chrome. And different agents and representation I've had over the years have actually said to me, that really is unique, the idea of selling that original piece of 8x10 film, from which I also make limited edition prints to sell to people that want to do beautiful big display for varying, interiors or varying purposes. But these are the reasons that, film is far superior for me. Also, with my 8x10 view camera, I have an 8x10 piece of ground glass. So if I expose, you see many of my images are of people. I've delved into different arenas of art. And for instance, if I do an exposure review and I want to add something to it later, I can take your picture, and on my 8x10 screen, I can outline you and know through a pin registration of a sort where you are to add and layer and do, the elements that need to complete the image later. So it's really ultimate for me to do this. And also, I do many different types of art. And it's not because I'm scattered. And it's not because, many artists do just one thing their whole careers. My one thing is 21 fundamental principles of pure photography on 8x10 film. But ultimately, it's funny, I have an Instagram director, he's a good friend of mine also, Taylor Bird. And he makes posts or he comments for me asking questions to engage the audience. And he recently did a post saying, comment and please let me know about your favorite art style. And someone wrote back, Michael, it's hard to pick just one. Please keep doing what you're doing. And I had, Taylor respond immediately to him to say, thank you very much, I appreciate this. Because, I do body form, I do architecture, I do still life, I do high resolution color abstract photography, like you'll see my many circles through like 15 exposures, creating some kind of a, special image.
Abstraction.
I do cubism. I do, again, I do painting with light. I do motion photography. But they all come under the same umbrella of purity. And if I don't do it the way I do it, and this again is not a put down to anybody using digital, I respect digital artists. But for me personally, it feels a little bit like I'm cheating. Because on the 8x10 film, as you said, it's complex and it's hard. But when everything goes into that one original chrome, it's like synonymous with anything in life that is pure. A pure sunset, a pure sky, a pure feeling, reaction you have to anything you see. It's that word pure is very valuable. And when I finish a chrome, and I'm very fortunate to have many compositions that personally satisfy me. As an artist, you need to satisfy yourself. Indeed. If you intend to satisfy your audience. And these are the real reasons, the heart of why I stay with film. And I mean, I shoot digital for a lot of things like family events or things like that where I need it to be portable. But when I create fine art, it's one way.
Well, it's more than just respectable point of view. It indeed explains what you find so valuable in the process, that it justifies the whole labor, the level of understanding, and a lot of patience.
Sure.
And just on a side note, I would like to mention that there is one thing that a lot of people don't understand. The big reason why digital photography don't have colors comparable to film photography is actually not the film. It's not the limitations of sensor, because those things are actually very powerful. It's actually modern optics.
Sure.
So I use digital cameras, but I work with old lenses. Some of them are 100 years old. And the reason for that is specifically this old glass. The magic of it is uncomparable with anything that being mass-produced right now.
Sure, sure.
Yes. And another thing is that actually is an extremely interesting point you had, that sensor virtually is just one type of film, and everybody has sensor produced by the same company. So virtually all photographers using digital cameras, using different optics, but essentially one type of film.
I understand, sure.
It's actually quite interesting, and we will have a few minutes to conclude it after this break.
Welcome to Single Trick at Single Shot. Today we're going to be talking about switching from digital to film. A lot of people do nowadays, and if you decided to do that, either just to try or as your conscious decision to switch altogether, there will be a lot of things you will need to learn, and a lot of things you will need to change in the way you photograph. But there is one thing that is very important, and you will really have to know it in order to avoid major disappointments. In digital, as you probably know, if you take a photograph, you really have to make sure it's not overexposed. Otherwise, there is nothing you can do. In RAW, white is always white. You can't change it. In film, on the other hand, overexposed image can be corrected through development of the negative. But underexposure sometimes is completely fatal and final. So just make sure that you will change it underexposure for overexposure.
Alright, we're back, and throughout the program you was mentioning several times 21 principles of pure photography that you developed. Can you tell us actually what are those principles?
Absolutely. I mean, again, it goes without saying that everything I do is on one piece of film. There's absolutely no special effects editing of any kind, no digital programs, no Adobe, etc. But on top of that, what I don't do is, I even have it listed here, no blue or green screening, no in-camera masks, no painting on the film itself, no painting on bodies, no projection of images, no shooting through glass or mirrors, no color backdrops, no filters of any kind, no photographing of printed images or transparencies, no photographing of reflections, no polarizations, no colorations, no cross-processing, no darkroom manipulation, as I said earlier, no optical assemblage, no airbrushing, no retouching digitally or otherwise, and no Photoshop. Absolutely everything is about purity. There's nothing whatsoever outside the natural boundaries of image capture on film. It's absolute purity, film purity through film and light.
Wow, it's virtually excluding everything photography created in order to manipulate images, so indeed it's the most pure process. So we're almost finished, so let me ask you, Michael, what inspires you in your creative process?
What inspires me, as mundane as it may sound, are the people immediately around me in my family. My son James, my older son James, since the day he was born, complete inspiration for everything I do. I have a new young son, he's 4 years old. I love him so much, both of my sons, Romeo and James. My wife, my ex-wife, like the people around me that I care about most, that, you know, I live every minute of my life with, are the ones that really motivate me in a big way, that I care about as much as I do my art, because art for me is everything. It's in everything we see, it's in everything we do. Many people put art in this one little place and kind of pigeonhole it and look at that word like, oh, this is art. Well, art is in every visual you see, it's in everything you feel.
Absolutely.
And I, again, am so grateful to those masters I spoke about earlier, bringing photography into the domain of the purest of fine art. I hope that people that don't understand that are somewhat embarrassed by their ignorance if they don't understand that photography is just as beautiful and special as sculpting, or as the painting by the traditional Renoirs and, you know, Gauguins and Rembrandts, and like, you know, even the modern guys like Andy Warhol or any of them.
As Romans used to say, ignorance can be educated, and you with your work doing quite a fine work, educating people, if not on conscious level, on emotional level, which is probably even more important. Thank you very much, Michael. It was very inspirational conversation. Good luck with your works.
It was an honor.
I hope to see them one day in one of the huge museums we have in this city.
Thank you so much.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark for Roundtable. Thanks for watching. See you next week.